Happy Easter. Is Easter practical? Don't answer. Is Easter practical? I mean, like presently practical. You're driving down the street and somehow Easter matters. That's been the question on my mind this week. I've struggled. I take seriously the opportunity to preach to you most Sunday mornings, and I want it to be what God desires from His Word. I want to be accurate to the truth, but I want to be helpful. And the question that continued to come to my mind is, what's the practicality of Easter? I asked Linda on several occasions. And the obvious answer to some degree is, it is the hope of everything for us. Like without the resurrection, we have nothing as believers. We might as well stop the whole thing if there's no resurrection. So in some sense, it's very practical in the sense of, in the past, there was this event in the past that has this immense future ramification, our future hope. But the question in my mind is it practical today? Well, I'm meditating on this question throughout the week, wanting to exhort you this morning. Linda comes home one day. Aaron, do you want to hear about, I asked her if I could share this story. And this is a mundane story. This is normal Aaron and Linda living. Do you want to hear about my day? Not really. I wanted to talk about myself, but if this has to be about you, that's fine. That's what I thought. I said, of course. So she tells me about her day, right? No. So she told me about her day. This was Thursday. She takes Sandy to the airport. Carol, her sister, passed away this last week, the weekend. Gloriously, the best she's been in a long time with Christ. So we're thankful for that, right? But we have to take Sandy to the airport to go to Michigan, to fly to Michigan to get some things taken care of. And she's like, I need to get to the hospital over on the west middle side of Madison to drop off some paperwork gloriously for some work that we're hoping to be done the next month that we're excited about for her. But she had to drop off this paperwork at the hospital. And so she drops off Sandy at the airport, and she drives to the hospital, and she gets behind 4 or 5 slow people. And all she has to do is drop off this one document in the office, right? And she has to go park somewhere, and so she gets into the parking ramp, and 4 or 5 slow people who are indifferent to her, right? Bunch of selfish people that live in Madison are driving in super slow, and they have to try to find a spot. And she's Linda. So those of you who are visiting, this might be lost a little bit on you, but Linda's fuming in the front seat, wanting to drive around all the people and wave at them as she goes. But she doesn't, because she's nicer than me. And so she gets up near the top, and she rushes in to get the paperwork handed in. And of course, there's 5 people that are in line that have to be received there in that area. And the lady is one of those sweethearts that's just wants to encourage everybody and have a conversation. And I want to know how you're feeling today. When we're we don't care. Just get me through this line. So she joyfully, serenely, as Linda floats through the line and gives the paperwork to the lady. And the lady, what did she say? She started a conversation with you, and you're I don't want to have a conversation with you. I need to go. So she's I have to be at work at 10 o'clock, right? Sweet Linda walks out. This is on her. She gets to 4D or whatever, and wonderfully we have the key fob. Starts clicking that thing, and hears the alarm go off on a different floor. So she has to figure out what floor she's on, and she realizes she's a level up. So she has to run to the stairs and go down and then get back. Stupid things go up and down and get very confused as to where you're at. And then she has to deal with the people going down that don't care that she's behind work. So she calls her boss as she's going 85 down the highway. I know, Linda, this is what I have to put up with on a regular basis, her sin this way. So we're driving, she's speeding along the highway. Remember, she said that I could share this story. Neither of us knew exactly how the story would come out at that request. But anyway, so she's going along the highway, she calls her boss. I know, illegal, right? So she's calling her boss and driving, and I'm going to be late, and she gets there 5 minutes late to work, and she floats in and brings joy to all who are around her. That's probably not exactly how she felt when she walked in. She told me that story. She's coming to a husband that needs her to just hear her, and I'm thinking, that would really fit my message on Sunday. That's the care and compassion I had in that moment. Can I use that story on Sunday? I know this sounds really rough, really. I'm sorry that happened, but could I use it for Sunday? It could be really, really helpful. This is what came to my mind as she's sharing this story with me. I honestly, please know I loved my wife better than that in that moment. But I did think about it, and later the next day I asked, can I use that? Because this is why. How does Easter matter when you're behind 5 people and they're annoying you? That was the question that I had. Like, is Easter only this thing that's out, like it matters because there's this future thing we look forward to, and it's huge, it has ginormous ramifications for our future, but does it matter when a lady is being nice to me and I don't want her to be because I'm in a hurry? How does it help me when I'm speeding down the highway, anxious about getting to work on time? How does the resurrection impact my grief as I mourn the loss of my sister? How does Easter matter then? That's what I wanted to know, how Easter mattered. Now, I may have set this message up horribly with you having some expectation that I'm going to gloriously answer that question. I'm going to try, but you may be dissatisfied. But I was super encouraged by this text in Hebrews 12:2. This text continued to come back to my mind and brought me encouragement. Verse 2 of Hebrews 2, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, this phrase, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. What does that mean? What does it mean, who for the joy set before him endured the cross? What was the joy set before him? Is it not true that in his present he endured because of a future hope? His present disposition was hugely impacted by his future hope. He endured the cross for the joy that was set before him. I wanted to know what that meant. So you come to the text and you look at the text to first understand the context, and it drove me into chapter 11 a bit, so we're going to look at chapter 11 and understand the context of Hebrews 12:2. But it still didn't really answer the question for me, and I think John 17 answered the question for me a little bit more fully. So I want to look at Hebrews 2, the context, or 12:2, the context. I want to jump to John 17 and see what is it that actually was the joy that was set before him, and then I want to offer you a practical example of that. That's our message this morning. So what's going on in Hebrews 12? Verse 1, therefore, you have been surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. What's that referring to? Therefore, what is the therefore? What is it pointing back to? Well, chapter 11 is what? The hall of faith. You go back to chapter 11 in Hebrews and you see by faith. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. By faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham. And my attention was drawn to this, verse 10. By faith Abraham, verse 10, was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. His obedience to the Father, God comes to Abraham and says, go, and he goes. Why? Because he looked forward to a city whose foundation and designer and the builder is God. His present obedience was directed by his future hope. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised. By faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, by faith Joseph, by faith Moses. Verse 26. By faith Moses considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. What does that mean? He considered the reproach of Christ. In essence, he considered the reproach that would come with being with the people of God. That reproach was better than all of the wealth of Egypt, because he was looking for a future reward. He took ostracization and rejection and suffering in the present because he was looking to this future reward. Verse 29, by faith the people of Israel. By faith Rahab, verse 31. And then he says, for time would fail me, verse 32, to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. And he goes on and on of all that they endured in the present by faith, because they had this future hope. And all these, verse 39, and all of these, though commended through faith, did not receive what was promised. They had this future expectation that did not materialize for them yet. They obeyed in the present because of this future expectation, but that future expectation was not something that they, in their life, experienced. Like them, you were surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, that cloud of witnesses that I just read of. Like them, you should do everything, verse 1 of chapter 12. You should do everything to get rid of everything that might keep you from running the race with endurance. Let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Now he says, I want you to presently endure the challenges of the Christian life because there's this future hope, like the Old Testament saints. But you have a better example. Looking to Jesus. You endure all things and get rid of anything that would cling to you, that would keep you from running with endurance. And as you're doing that, look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Now that's the context of Hebrews 12:2. But that doesn't answer the question, does it? What is the joy set before Christ that resulted in his present enduring the cross? I think there's a hint at it, a fairly significant hint in the verse itself, but I think it is revealed even more thoroughly in John 17. But let's look at the hint first. Verse 2, for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Is that the joy that was set before him? His ultimate glorification. So, for the joy of his ultimate glorification, that joy set before him, he endured the cross. Well, I think that's along the right path, but I think he flushes that out even more in John 17. So go to John 17. The beautiful high priestly prayer of Christ. First 5 verses, he prays for himself. Starting in verse 6, he prays for his disciples. You get to verse 20, he prays for all those who would be impacted by his disciples. He starts with himself in the first 5 verses, and his primary prayer to the Father is, glorify me. Back to the position I held prior to creation. Look at verse 5. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. So he desires Jesus Christ in his passion week, desired to go through that and be glorified back to the position he had prior to creation. That is his heart. This is the prayer right before his death. Okay? So the high priestly prayer, Friday night, surrounding the events of their Passover celebration. Following that, this is his prayer. This is his heart prior to his death, right? I want to be glorified back to the position I was in before creation. So that what? So that the Father would be glorified. You look at verse 1, glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. And how is that accomplished? Verse 2, since you have given him authority over flesh to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And then look at the phrase in verse 10, all mine are yours and yours are mine, and I am glorified in whom? Them. I am glorified in them. So how does this work? Jesus Christ, prior to his death, desires to be glorified back to the position he held before creation so that the Father can be glorified. And how is it that Jesus Christ is glorified? He is glorified through the redemption of the people that God the Father had given him. Redemption glorifies the Son. He redeemed you. And in that redemption, he is glorified. And through that redemption of you, he receives glory, and ultimately, the Father receives the glory. God the Father is glorified by the exaltation of Jesus Christ, and the exaltation of Jesus Christ accomplishes your redemption. So what was it that the joy set before him, he endured the cross? Our redemption. That would glorify him and glorify the Father. That is what was set before him. The reconciliation of all that was broken in Genesis 3 is restored in the work of Christ. All things reconciled to himself is what sat in front of Christ as he died for us. He desired to reconcile everything for the glory of the Father. That is what was his joy, your redemption. So I come then to feel satisfied with an understanding of Hebrews 12:2, but I still don't know how that impacts Linda when she's frustrated in a normal morning. Is it not true that that story of Linda rings true to every single one of you at some moment? That's why I use that story. Every one of you have been in something like that. How does the fact that Christ's joy of reconciling all things to himself matter to you when you're in the middle of that? For that, let's go to John 16. I'm sorry, don't go to John 16. Wouldn't help you at all. Acts 16. Acts 16, story of Paul and Silas in prison. Paul and Silas, they go to speak in the synagogue. If you're turning there to make sure that I'm telling the accurate story, starts in verse 16 and goes into 30s. Let me summarize for you. They're on their way to the synagogue. They're going to engage with the believers there, or the Jews there. And this woman comes, and she's driving them nuts, and he deals with and he casts the demon out. And this causes problems in the city, and they want Paul and Silas to leave. They stone Paul and Silas. They throw them in the prison, and they put them in the stocks, likely chained to a Roman soldier. So Paul and Silas are in prison unjustly. I think this is important. Unjustly shackled to a soldier in the stocks. Incredibly uncomfortable. Now, let me ask you, what would be your emotion in that moment? Now, mine might be, this is really unjust. And you know what? I would be right in thinking that. And I would not be wrong when who should I be in this? I'll be Silas. It just makes more sense. As I turn to Paul, I'm like, this is super unjust. He's like, you're right, Silas. These people are really wrong, I hate them. Well, it seems like it went a little far there, but they're wrong. We'll take that. Okay, thanks, Paul. I'm struggling in my heart right now, and these two Roman soldiers that are sitting here listening to this conversation, I think they're wrong too. And the prison guy who put us in here, he's wrong. In fact, this whole Roman government is wrong. They're unjust, and we need to advocate for our freedom. This is stupid, and they're all dumb. Is Silas right in that moment? He sure is. And we don't have enough in this story to know for sure how that conversation went. So just in case, I made that up just now. That's not in the text. That's, setting the stage for us, okay? But we know this. Paul and Silas, one, were normal people that had the flesh, and they were struggling in that moment. I have no doubt of that. And it's possible that their singing, they needed their singing to get them to the right spot. But this we know. It's midnight. Paul and Silas are singing hymns. So what is the present disposition of Paul and Silas in the midst of suffering? Joy. Joy was their present disposition because of this future hope. But it's not just joy. Why? What happens after they sing? An earthquake comes. The doors are open. Paul and Silas start escaping. Once again, let me speculate. Silas is on his way out. That I would have been, once again, I'm Silas. Paul's like, I just heard the prisoner or the prison ward say he's going to kill himself because we're all escaped. We got to stop. And Silas is probably like, good riddance to him. Like he shouldn't have been putting us in here. Anyway, I'm just saying it's possible there's some of this going on. I don't know for sure. But once again, in the flesh, one of them probably struggled a little bit with just a pause of, I don't really care about that guy. But what do? What present disposition is characterized in that moment? Love. Love for that unbeliever. And Paul's the one that does this in the text. He stops, he hears the warden say, what's the guy's? Jailer, thank you. That's just, the jailer is going to commit suicide. Paul stops him, we're all here, don't commit suicide. And what happens? Whole family comes to Christ. So, what is the present disposition of Paul and Silas in the midst of suffering and frustration? Joy and love. Were they justified in thinking we're being treated poorly and we feel just to declare our righteous indignation? Absolutely. But was that their disposition? No. In the midst of suffering, they had to work, I'm certain they had to work through this, but they presented joy and love for the redemption of people. Their present was impacted by a future understanding and hope. Just like Christ's future expectation of the redemption of mankind made him endure the cross, just like Moses put up with losing all the riches of Egypt for this future hope, just like Abraham went and sacrificed a life that he knew because God had promised him something in the future. That is the practicality of the Passion Week. We've been given a reason in the midst of suffering and frustration to have joy and hope and love instead of righteous indignation, bitterness, anger. Linda had to get out of the car and walk into a group of ladies that she works with every day. It has been her heart's desire that she would be a reflection of the light of Christ to these women. That is her hope. She had two options in that moment. She could allow a desire for the redemption of mankind to produce joy and love in that moment, or she could have, understandably to any one of us, walked in with a less than serene disposition. And all of them would have understood. And all of them probably would have been in that less than serene disposition with her. You're right. Those stupid people in Madison don't know how to drive. I hate that parking lot. It's stupid. Right? They would have all been right there with her. And fighting this as she walks in, I don't know what her disposition was. Yes, she's an angel. Yes, she's a sinful person too. Okay? So she struggled, and it's irrelevant how she walked in. That's the battle that she had. And that is the battle every single one of us have every day. Is our disposition reflection of the light of Christ because we love people and we're filled with the hope of future redemption? Is that what is motivating us? Is that what is pouring from our life, our reflection? Is this of redemption and salvation and joy and love of others? Or are we grumpy, moody, angry, vindictive people, feeling justified in that because we live in a stupid culture? Where are you going to land? Because of the resurrection, you have the potential for this future hope. You can endure suffering today with love and joy because you have been redeemed by Jesus Christ. I call you to that this morning. Lord, help us, because Paul and Silas were normal people that struggled like normal people do with the flesh and not responding well all the time. Abraham, normal guy, struggled. Moses struggled. All of them struggled. Some of them failed more than others. Some of them were painted this picture throughout the New Testament of it seems like there's very little struggle, and it can be frustrating for us as we look at someone like Paul. But he struggled. And yet, there was this future hope that transformed him. We want that. We do. Every believer here this morning wants that, and we struggle to get that. You know what? Look up here for just a second. Paul and Silas probably did not produce that in that moment. You know what I mean? It's not like they going along, they really never think about spiritual things. They got imprisoned, and they're like, we got to put on joy and love. Right? Like it was this constant pursuit of an eternal focus that in the moment produced that spiritual reality. So I guess the exhortation why I felt the need to stop my prayer, don't think that this is something in the moment you're just going to pray like, God, give me this. Now you should, and maybe he will in his grace. But this is a constant pursuit of holiness and righteousness and love. Look to Christ, think on Christ, know his word, love him, and love him more tomorrow than you do today. And when we're in the midst of that struggle, the likelihood of joy and love being the ramifications is much more likely. Does that make sense? Okay, let me finish praying. Lord, that's what we want. Which means we're not asking just for a moment, we're asking for a lifelong pursuit of you so that we can be image bearers of the light of Christ to a world that desperately needs the light. In Jesus' name, amen.